بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Today's workshop is designed to give introductory material as well as resources that include online resources as to how to build an Islamic will and to determine your inheritance as a Muslim. I want to first start by just clarifying the purpose and the agenda for today's workshop. The purpose of today's workshop is to show how to calculate your inheritance using an online resource, show also how you can create a will on your own, and templates and examples will be provided, and lastly, to answer any brief or simple questions in terms of inheritance and wills. Today's workshop is not designed to get into complex Shari'i issues, things that I have actually no knowledge of, or issues that are confined or that would be limited to a legal resource such as an attorney. But at the end of the workshop, I will provide a resource and a phone number in terms of someone that you can contact to get more legal guidance in terms of your specific situation for a will or for inheritance. So let me first start by explaining the concept of the will. The will in Islam is called al-wasiyah. Okay, that is the term that is referred to in several ahadith that talks about a will. And there's a hadith that talks to this effect about a will, in which the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, Sahih Bukhari, he said what can be roughly translated as, "It is the duty of a Muslim who has anything to bequeath not to let 2 nights pass without writing a will." So, as a Muslim male or even as a Muslim female, it is your duty and your obligation to create a will as soon as possible, as this hadith demonstrates. So, we know that the Prophet ﷺ had a will. We also know that the will was a requirement for Muslims in the previous societies, and it's even required obviously for our society today. And we also know, I want to talk briefly about the concept that a will in this society or even in this country serves several purposes. First and foremost, it protects your rights. So you may pass, and we all will pass at a certain point. And when we pass, we have to, number one, protect our rights as Muslims. Number two, we need the purpose of a will, and the purpose of a will for even a non-Muslim is to clearly designate with well-documented instructions as to how they want to be buried, how they want their wealth to be distributed, certain wishes in terms of items or assets that they have to be designated. In some cases, if you have liabilities, if you have loans, or if you have money that's owed to individuals, you can designate how you want that handled. And as a Muslim, that's actually very important. You have to understand that if you do owe people money and you do pass, that your relatives or somebody that you designate in your will should be handling those affairs for you. And that's another purpose as to what the will serve. I want to talk about another hadith in which it's a scenario or a story where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when one of the Prophet's companions suffered a severe illness, he asked how much of his vast wealth he should give as a gift, because he only had one daughter who qualified to be an inheritor under Islamic law. And the Prophet ﷺ stated 1/3 and said, "It is better to leave them richer than poorer and destitute." And this is mentioned in Sahih Bukhari. And I want to reference also this website that I'm using, which is islamreligion.com, and there's an article that is detailing and is the source of a lot of the information that I'm sharing with you today.
We'll put the link on the website.
Okay.
You can say it.
We're going to put the link on the website for the source of all this information. So, there are certain guidelines that I'm going to get into in terms of the Islamic will. And one of those guidelines being the followers of two different religions may not inherit from each other. So a person should account for the fact that they may have relatives who are non-Muslim. And vice versa. There could be a non-Muslim who has relatives that are Muslim. And this is something that we'll get into in terms of the inheritance, but in Islam, if you do have relatives who are non-Muslim, they cannot inherit any of your wealth. And that also factors into the calculation. I want to share with you also, and this is mentioned in the article, that many non-Muslims have actually studied and analyzed the Islamic inheritance process and the Islamic will process. And there's a professor by the name of Almaric Rusi from King's College in London who was quoted as saying, and I have the quote mentioned here on the website, "The Muslim law of inheritance comprises beyond question the most refined and elaborate set of rules for the devolution of property that is known to the Western world." And I think why I wanted to share this and why this is significant is that we all know that Islam is not just a religion, it's a deen, and a deen is described as something in which it's a way of life. So it encompasses everything from the way we use the bathroom, to the way that we get married, to even, like what our Sheikh mentioned actually on Wednesday, to a dua you would mention after you got married, once you are with your wife. So it gets into very specific details of every aspect of our life. And lo and behold, when we pass, even how we should structure our wealth, even how we should assign guardianship to our children, all these things are considered and factors that Islam has guided us on. And following through on those guidelines and having your rights exercised the way that you want them to be exercised as a Muslim, I think is one of the most high, or one of the biggest priorities that we have to ensure is being prepared for us before we pass. So, you know, the idea of kind of what I'm sharing today is that encompassing our whole life in Islam is very important. And making preparations for things that we know is going to happen. We know for a fact that we're going to die. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated that in the Quran. Then, based on that, we need to be prepared. We need to have a will as instructed by the Prophet ﷺ, and we need to take measures to ensure that that happens. I want to transition now and actually talk about a completed will. And I'm going to share my will as an example that is now demonstrated on the screen. This is a template that I can provide to members of the community. I also have a template that I provided here in printed copies that you can take and look, or even you can have these with you if you'd like to make copies on your own for these. So I want to first start by saying the will is a legal document, and depending upon your state, has different requirements. So in the state of Arizona, the will does not have to be notarized, although it is encouraged for it to be notarized. The will, for it to be legal and for it to be valid, simply needs to be signed by 2 witnesses. That is the requirement for this state. In other states, it needs to be notarized. Some states may require court authorization, but in the state of Arizona, it's very simple. You just need 2 witnesses to sign. You probably want to house that document in a safety deposit box, or if you want to provide an authorized copy to your heirs in some type of documented format. But it's a very simple process, and anyone can create a will at any time. You don't need an attorney to create a will, although if you want to get into the precision of certain things, liabilities, and things concerning your inheritance, you may want to consult an attorney if you have certain situations like that. So mine starts with a preamble. And basically, I'm not going to read through it, but it's very simple. It says, I bear witness that there is no deity but Allah, the One, the Merciful, the Almighty. I bear witness that Prophet Muhammad is his last messenger. I bear witness that Allah is the truth and His promise. And I mentioned these things, and this is a template, but I think that this is very important. I mean, you want the person who's going to be reading this will, whether it be your heirs or whether it be whomever, it may be a non-Muslim, you want them to understand that this document that you're putting together is based on your belief system and those founding principles of Islam, which is that we have one God, the Prophet ﷺ is his last messenger, so on and so forth. That is the first section. It's just the preamble, and it's very basic and generic in terms of the information about Allah, His Messenger, ﷺ, and things concerning Islam. So it talks about the pillars. Funeral and burial rites. This is a very important piece, and I want to emphasize this. So mine states, and I'll read verbatim here, I ordain that no autopsy or embalming be done on my body unless required by law and without unjustified delay. My body be washed, wrapped with cloth, free of any ornaments and any other articles, prayed for and then buried, which should be done by Muslims in a complete accordance with Islamic tenets. I also ordain that I only be buried in a Muslim cemetery or in an area of a cemetery separated and designated for Muslims only. That piece I actually put in there specifically for myself. But that is, a lot of people think, well, you just get it right to your inheritance and it'll be that simple. This is now, section 1 is just talking about your funeral. Okay? It's very important that you dictate how you want to be buried. Remember, in Islam, we don't bury someone in a coffin. So think if you were to die and you have no surviving relatives. The standard of practice in this state or even in this country is to put someone in a coffin. In some situations, if there's an accident or if there's some kind of incident that occurs, the police may decide or authorities may decide that they want to do an autopsy. Here, I'm dictating that unless there's some outlying situation or some legal requirement, I don't want an autopsy done. And there are all kinds of other situations like organ donations and how your body is prepared, how your body is cared for, where your body is sitting in terms of before the burial. So it's clear, you need to be clear in that you want yourself buried as soon as possible based on Islamic guidelines, and you don't want any other procedures to be done on you unless it's absolutely needed. I won't get into too much details, but after that I appoint people to execute the necessary provisions for that article. So the first article is about funeral and burial rites, and in my situation, I've designated my wife to be the guardian of those provisions. And if she were to pass, in the event that he or she will be passing or passes, I designate another person, which is my father, and then it goes on, and it goes all the way to my brother. So this is, again, just a guideline, something to consider for yourself. I'm going to move on to the next article. This article also talks about something that I just wanted to briefly touch upon. I ordain that no pictures, crescents, or stars, decorations, crosses, flags, any symbols, Islamic or otherwise, or music shall be involved at any stage of the process of conducting my burial or even be placed at the site of my grave. That's very important. And if you go, and again, I'm not going to delve deep into this and get into a tangent, but if you go into the traditions of Islam, and if you really look at what the Prophet ﷺ dictated in terms of how to bury someone, we don't put flowers at the gravesite. We don't put crosses. We don't put crescents. The crescent concept is actually something that is related to the Ottoman Empire, and that's a different topic altogether. When you start talking about music, pictures of yourself, pictures of something, pictures of a dog, there's all kinds of things that people do that in Islam is not recommended. And it's very important that the burial procedure be conducted in a way in accordance with the established sunnah. So there shouldn't be somebody there wailing. You shouldn't have a scene, so to speak. It should be a very orderly, disciplined protocol that we go through in which we clean the body, we wrap the body, we lower the body into the grave. There is dirt that's applied that it goes over it. There's a dua that is performed by a sheikh or someone of authority, and then we leave. There are some condolences that can be applied for the family, and that's it. It is not the same procedure that you find in non-Muslim traditions for how to conduct a burial. I'll even challenge the fact that everyone should wear black. I see a lot of Muslims do that. I don't know if there's any basis for that in Islam, but I'm not going to delve into those areas. I'll just move on. I ordain that my grave shall be dug deep into the ground in complete accordance with the specifications of Islam practice and that faces the direction of the Qibla. Very important. You need to face the direction of the Qibla. I ordain that my body shall be buried without a casket. And in the event that local laws require a casket encasement, I ordain that such encasement be the simplest, most modest, and least expensive type possible. That's a piece that I added. I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but I just want to share that with everyone in this lecture, in this workshop today, because I think that those are things you should be accounting for. Article 2, executor. So you need to appoint someone to execute your will and the provisions for each testament. And again, for me, I nominated my wife, and then my father, and then my sister and my brother, and that was giving her power. So this is an executor